Emma Chen stared at the medical bill in her trembling hands, the numbers blurring through her tears. $250,000 for the experimental cardiac surgery that could save her mother's life. At 24, working double shifts as a waitress at Milano's Italian restaurant, Emma barely earned enough to cover rent on their tiny apartment and her mother's current medications. The sum might as well have been $2 million for all the possibility she had of raising it. Linda Chen, 58 years old and the strongest woman Emma had ever known, lay in the hospital bed looking fragile for the first time in her daughter's memory. She had immigrated to America 25 years ago with nothing but Emma in her arms and an unwavering determination to build a better life. Working multiple jobs, learning English at night, and sacrificing every comfort, Linda had raised Emma alone after Emma's father abandoned them when she was 2 years old. Now Linda's heart was failing, and the doctors had given her 6 months to live without the surgery. The procedure was considered experimental, which meant insurance wouldn't cover it, but Dr. Harrison had shown them success rates that offered real hope. Emma would do anything to give her mother that chance, but anything seemed pathetically inadequate when measured against $250,000. Emma had already exhausted every option she could think of. The bank had rejected her loan application immediately. A waitress with no collateral was not a risk they were willing to take. Crowdfunding efforts had raised only $3,000 in 2 months. Family friends had contributed what they could, but Emma's community was made up of hard-working immigrants who were barely making ends meet themselves. As she sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at the impossible numbers, Emma made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and began researching something she never thought she would consider: wealthy men looking for marriages of convenience. Chapter 2. The Desperate Search. Emma's research led her down a rabbit hole of websites and services she never knew existed, places where wealthy older men sought young wives for social appearances, and where young women marketed themselves for financial security. The whole industry disgusted her, but desperation had a way of eroding principles that seemed absolute just hours before. She spent 3 sleepless nights creating profiles on various platforms, each one feeling like she was selling pieces of her soul. Emma tried to present herself honestly, a college-educated woman working in the service industry, caring for her sick mother, with no interest in luxury or social climbing. She hoped someone might value authenticity over artificial enhancement. The responses were immediate and mostly repulsive. Men who saw her photos and immediately made crude assumptions about her availability and willingness to compromise her dignity. Emma deleted dozens of messages without reading them completely, but she forced herself to continue searching. Her mother's life hung in the balance, and every day of delay brought her closer to losing the only family she had left. Then she received a message from Alexander Sterling that was different from all the others. He was direct but respectful, proposing a business arrangement rather than making personal assumptions. Alexander explained that he needed a wife for social and business reasons, something about board expectations and family pressure, and was willing to provide financial compensation that would solve Emma's immediate crisis. Alexander's background check revealed exactly what she had hoped to find: a successful businessman with an impeccable reputation and no scandals or concerning behavior. At 38, he ran a technology consulting firm that worked with Fortune 500 companies, and his personal life appeared to be that of a workaholic who avoided public relationships. Most importantly, his offer was exactly what Emma needed: enough money to pay for her mother's surgery, with no expectations of physical intimacy or emotional involvement. It was a practical arrangement between 2 adults who could help each other solve problems that money could fix. Chapter 3. The Meeting. Alexander Sterling appeared nervous when he met Emma at the small coffee shop she had suggested. a marked contrast to the confident businessman she had expected based on his professional photographs and online presence. At 6'2", with prematurely grey hair and kind eyes behind expensive glasses, he looked more like a university professor than the calculating rich man Emma had prepared herself to encounter. Emma had spent hours preparing for this meeting, practicing responses to questions she anticipated about her willingness to enter a marriage of convenience. She expected to feel judged or objectified, but Alexander's discomfort seemed to match her own. He ordered coffee nervously and spent several minutes discussing the weather and her neighborhood before addressing the reason for their meeting. Alexander's explanation for needing a wife was surprisingly straightforward. His company was pursuing a major contract with a family-owned corporation whose leadership valued traditional marriage and stability in their business partners. His bachelor status had become a liability in negotiations, and several board members had suggested that his single lifestyle made him appear unreliable or immature to conservative clients. More personally, Alexander's aging parents had been pressuring him for years to settle down and provide them with grandchildren. His father's recent heart attack had intensified this pressure, and Alexander had realized that introducing a wife might give his parents peace of mind during his father's recovery period. Emma found herself unexpectedly sympathetic to Alexander's position, recognizing that he was also trapped by circumstances beyond his control. His need for a wife was different from her need for money, but both of them were making decisions based on family obligations rather than personal desires. When Alexander asked about Emma's situation, she gave him the abbreviated version. Her mother needed expensive surgery, and she was willing to enter a temporary marriage to secure funding. She was careful not to present herself as a victim or to make emotional appeals that might complicate their professional arrangement. Chapter 4. The Agreement. The prenuptial agreement Alexander presented was more generous than Emma had dared to hope, but also more comprehensive than she had expected. The document outlined not just financial arrangements, but detailed expectations for their public behavior, social obligations, and the duration of their marriage. Emma would receive the full amount for her mother's surgery up front, plus a monthly allowance that was more than her annual wages as a waitress. In exchange, Emma would be required to attend social functions as Alexander's wife, maintain appearances of a happy marriage in public, and live in his home for a minimum of 2 years. The agreement specified separate bedrooms, no expectations of physical intimacy, and clear boundaries about personal space and privacy. After 2 years, they could divorce quietly, and Emma would receive an additional settlement that would ensure her financial security. Emma read every word of the 30-page document, taking notes and asking questions that surprised Alexander with their sophistication. Despite having no legal training, Emma's natural intelligence and careful attention to detail revealed potential issues that even Alexander's lawyers had overlooked. Her questions were practical rather than emotional, focused on protecting both parties rather than maximizing her own benefits. The most important clause to Emma was the one guaranteeing immediate payment for her mother's medical expenses. Alexander agreed to wire the money to the hospital within 24 hours of signing the marriage certificate, ensuring that Linda's surgery could be scheduled without further delay. Alexander seemed genuinely interested in Emma's welfare beyond their contractual obligations. He asked about her mother's condition, her work history, and her plans for after their eventual divorce. His concern appeared authentic rather than calculated, giving Emma hope that their arrangement might be more comfortable than she had anticipated. When Emma finally signed the agreement, she felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. She had secured her mother's life, but had committed herself to 2 years of pretending to be someone she wasn't, married to a man she barely knew. Chapter 5. The Wedding. The wedding ceremony was held in Alexander's backyard garden, a small affair attended only by immediate family members and a few close friends. Emma wore a simple white dress that Alexander had purchased for her, elegant but not extravagant, appropriate for the low-key nature of their arrangement. To outside observers, it appeared to be an intimate ceremony reflecting the couple's preference for privacy over spectacle. Emma's mother, Linda, attended the wedding from a wheelchair, having been released from the hospital the day before for this special occasion. The doctors had scheduled her surgery for the following week, now that payment had been secured, and Linda was trying to appear strong and happy for her daughter, despite her obvious physical weakness. Alexander's parents, Margaret and Charles Sterling, were clearly thrilled to see their son finally married. Margaret fussed over Emma with genuine warmth, welcoming her into the family with an enthusiasm that made Emma feel guilty about the deception they were perpetrating. Charles, still recovering from his heart attack, appeared relieved and proud as he watched his son take wedding vows. The ceremony itself was brief and professional, conducted by a justice of the peace who had performed dozens of similar services. Emma found herself unexpectedly moved by the traditional vows, despite knowing that their promises to love and honor each other were legally binding but emotionally hollow. Alexander's voice was steady as he spoke his lines, but Emma noticed his hands trembling slightly as he placed the ring on her finger. The small reception that followed was warm and genuine, with both families mingling more easily than Emma had expected. Alexander was attentive and kind throughout the afternoon, playing the role of the devoted new husband while ensuring Emma felt comfortable with his relatives and friends. As the day ended and guests departed, Emma realized that the easy part was over. Now they had to live together as husband and wife, maintaining their deception daily while navigating the complex emotions that their arrangement had already begun to stir. Chapter 6. Living the Lie. Alexander's home was a modern masterpiece of glass and steel overlooking the city, decorated with expensive art and furniture that Emma was afraid to touch. Her bedroom was larger than the apartment she had shared with her mother, complete with a private bathroom and walk-in closet that Alexander had stocked with clothing appropriate for her new role as his wife. The first few weeks of their marriage fell into a routine that was surprisingly comfortable. Alexander left early for work and returned late, giving Emma plenty of time to adjust to her new surroundings and visit her mother in the hospital. When they were together, their interactions were polite and respectful, more like roommates than spouses, but without the awkwardness Emma had feared. Emma's biggest challenge was learning to play the role of a wealthy businessman's wife in social situations. Alexander's friends and business associates expected her to be knowledgeable about wine, art, and current events that her working-class background hadn't prepared her for. Alexander helped her prepare for social functions, briefing her on attendees and coaching her on appropriate conversation topics. What surprised Emma most was how genuinely kind Alexander was in private. He asked about her mother's progress, remembered details about her interests and concerns, and seemed to take pleasure in small acts of thoughtfulness like having her favorite coffee available in the morning or recording television shows he thought she might enjoy. Alexander, for his part, was discovering that Emma was nothing like the materialistic gold digger he had expected to marry for convenience. She was intelligent, hard-working, and completely unimpressed by his wealth. Emma's focus remained entirely on her mother's health, and she seemed almost uncomfortable with the luxury that surrounded her in his home. Their arrangement was working exactly as planned from a practical standpoint, but both Emma and Alexander were beginning to realize that spending 2 years in close proximity while pretending to be married was going to be more emotionally complex than either had anticipated. Chapter 7. Unexpected Intimacy. As Emma's mother recovered from her successful surgery, Emma found herself with time and emotional space to actually notice Alexander as more than just the solution to her financial crisis. He was intelligent and funny in private, passionate about his work, and surprisingly vulnerable when he talked about his fears of disappointing his parents or failing to live up to family expectations. Alexander discovered that Emma had been accepted to law school before her mother's illness forced her to abandon her educational plans to work full-time. Her quick grasp of legal concepts, her analytical thinking, and her natural sense of justice impressed him in ways that had nothing to do with their contractual arrangement. He began encouraging her to consider returning to school after their marriage ended. Their evening conversations gradually evolved from polite exchanges about daily schedules to genuine discussions about books, current events, and personal philosophies. Emma learned that Alexander's workaholic lifestyle stemmed from pressure to prove himself worthy of his family's business legacy, while Alexander discovered that Emma's fierce protectiveness of her mother reflected a deep capacity for loyalty and sacrifice. The turning point came during a charity gala where Emma handled a difficult social situation with grace and intelligence that impressed everyone present. A prominent businessman's wife had made subtly racist comments about Emma's background, and Emma's response was both dignified and devastating, shutting down the woman's prejudice while maintaining her own composure perfectly. Alexander realized that night that he was genuinely proud to have Emma as his wife, not because she was playing her role effectively, but because she was an extraordinary woman who deserved respect and admiration. The discovery that his feelings were becoming real rather than performed created a complication he hadn't anticipated. Emma experienced her own moment of recognition when Alexander defended her to his business associates who questioned her suitability as his wife. His anger at their disrespect was protective and genuine, revealing that his concern for her welfare had evolved beyond contractual obligations into personal care. Chapter 8. Growing Feelings. 6 months into their marriage, both Emma and Alexander were struggling with the reality that their feelings had evolved far beyond their original agreement. What had begun as a mutually beneficial business arrangement had become something neither had planned for: the foundation of genuine emotional intimacy. Alexander found himself looking forward to coming home each evening, not just because Emma was beautiful and interesting, but because she had become his closest friend and confidant. Her perspective on his business challenges was valuable. Her company was relaxing after stressful days, and her presence in his home had transformed it from a showcase into an actual residence where he felt comfortable and happy. Emma discovered that Alexander was not the cold, calculating businessman she had expected, but a man who carried enormous pressure to succeed while maintaining deep loyalty to family and friends. His generosity toward her had never felt condescending or transactional, but rather like genuine care for her well-being and happiness. The most dangerous development was their growing physical attraction to each other. Despite their agreement to maintain separate bedrooms and avoid intimacy, both found themselves drawn to casual touches, lingering conversations, and moments of closeness that threatened to cross the boundaries they had established. Their first kiss happened during a quiet evening when Alexander was helping Emma practice for an important social function. The moment felt natural and inevitable, but its aftermath was awkward and confusing for both of them. They had crossed a line that transformed their relationship from professional to personal, creating complications that threatened the stability of their arrangement. Emma began to question whether her feelings for Alexander were genuine or simply the result of gratitude and proximity. She worried that she was falling in love with her husband for the wrong reasons, and that her emotions might be influencing her ability to think clearly about their future. Alexander faced his own crisis of conscience as he realized he wanted their marriage to become real rather than temporary. But he also knew that Emma had never chosen him freely. She had married him out of desperation, and any pressure from him might be unfair given the power dynamics of their situation. Chapter 9. The Investigation. Alexander's investigation into Emma's background was not motivated by suspicion or distrust, but by his desire to understand the woman he was falling in love with and to find ways to help her achieve her own goals and dreams. What he discovered was both heartbreaking and inspiring, revealing depths of sacrifice and strength that even Emma herself didn't fully recognize. Emma's academic record showed exceptional performance despite working multiple jobs throughout college. Her professors described her as one of the most promising students they had ever taught, with a particular talent for advocacy and legal analysis. Her acceptance to law school had come with partial scholarship offers that she had been forced to decline when her mother's health crisis began. Medical records revealed that Linda Chen's heart condition had been developing for over 2 years, during which Emma had been managing her mother's care while working and attending school. Emma had delayed her mother's treatment multiple times to save money, gradually compromising her own educational and career opportunities to prioritize her mother's immediate needs. Financial records showed that Emma had been sending money to extended family members in China, supporting elderly relatives and cousins pursuing education. Even while struggling to pay for her mother's medical care, Emma had continued making these family contributions, leaving herself with almost nothing for personal expenses or emergency savings. Most significantly, Alexander discovered that Emma had researched him extensively before responding to his marriage proposal. Her decision to marry him had not been impulsive or opportunistic, but carefully calculated to ensure that she was entering an arrangement with someone whose reputation suggested he would honor his commitments and treat her with respect. Alexander's investigation revealed that Emma had married him not because she was greedy or materialistic, but because she was desperate to save her mother's life and had exhausted every other option. Her sacrifice was even greater than he had realized. She had given up her own future to secure her mother's survival. Chapter 10. The Revelation. Alexander's decision to confess his true feelings came during a quiet Sunday morning when he and Emma were reading newspapers together in the breakfast nook, a domestic scene that felt more real and comfortable than any of their public appearances as a married couple. The normalcy of the moment made Alexander acutely aware of how much he had come to value their life together. Alexander began by acknowledging that their relationship had evolved beyond their original agreement and admitting that he had fallen in love with Emma over the past several months. He explained that his feelings were not based on gratitude or convenience, but on genuine admiration for her character, intelligence, and strength. He wanted to offer her the choice to make their marriage real if her own feelings had similarly evolved. Emma's response was not what Alexander had hoped for. Instead of joy or reciprocal confession, Emma became quiet and withdrawn, explaining that she needed time to process his revelation. She thanked him for his honesty, but made it clear that she could not make any immediate decisions about their future. Over the following days, Emma's behavior became increasingly distant and conflicted. She continued to fulfill her obligations as his wife in public settings, but their private interactions became formal and careful, as if she was trying to rebuild the emotional walls that had gradually dissolved over their months together. Alexander realized that his confession had inadvertently placed Emma in an impossible position. If she reciprocated his feelings, she might always wonder whether her emotions were genuine or influenced by gratitude and financial dependence. If she didn't reciprocate, she faced the prospect of living with rejection for the remainder of their contractual period. What Alexander didn't know was that Emma was struggling with her own growing feelings for him, but was terrified that acting on those emotions would transform her from a woman who had made a difficult but honest business decision into someone who had manipulated a kind man's affections for personal gain. The love that both felt was becoming a source of pain and confusion rather than joy, complicated by the transactional foundation of their relationship and the power imbalances that made authentic emotional choices nearly impossible. Chapter 11. The Discovery. Alexander's discovery of the truth about Emma's motivations came not through investigation or confrontation, but through an accidentally overheard phone conversation between Emma and her mother. Linda Chen was expressing concern about Emma's obvious emotional attachment to Alexander, worrying that her daughter was falling in love with a man she had married only to secure medical funding. Emma's tearful responses revealed the full scope of her emotional conflict. She confessed to her mother that she had indeed fallen in love with Alexander, but felt that acting on those feelings would be a betrayal of the honest transaction they had originally agreed upon. Emma worried that Alexander's kindness and generosity were motivated by pity or obligation rather than genuine affection. Most heartbreaking was Emma's admission that she felt unworthy of Alexander's love because she had married him for money rather than affection. She believed that her desperate circumstances had compromised her ability to enter the relationship as an equal partner, and that any love between them would always be tainted by the financial necessity that had brought them together. Alexander listened from the hallway with growing understanding and devastation, realizing that the woman he loved was torturing herself with guilt over a decision that he had considered purely practical and mutually beneficial. Emma's pain was real and deep, stemming not from lack of feeling, but from too much integrity to accept love she felt she hadn't earned honestly. The conversation also revealed that Emma had been planning to end their marriage early, despite the financial penalties outlined in their prenuptial agreement. She had been secretly saving money to repay Alexander for her mother's surgery, hoping to restore their relationship to its original professional footing and free herself to love him without the burden of financial obligation. Alexander realized that Emma's emotional withdrawal had not been rejection, but self-protection, motivated by the same fierce integrity that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. Her refusal to accept his love was not indifference, but rather the ultimate expression of her respect for their relationship and her concern for his welfare. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. Alexander's confrontation with Emma about what he had overheard was gentle but direct, conducted in their living room on a quiet evening when both had been avoiding the emotional tension that had been building between them for weeks. Alexander began by acknowledging that he had unintentionally overheard her conversation with her mother and that he understood why she had been struggling with his confession of love. Emma's immediate reaction was embarrassment and anger, not at Alexander, but at herself for allowing her private emotional crisis to become a burden for him. She began to apologize for complicating their arrangement with feelings and concerns that went beyond their contractual obligations, but Alexander interrupted her self-recriminations. Alexander explained that Emma's integrity and self-sacrifice were among the qualities that had made him fall in love with her, and that her concern about their relationship's foundation actually proved her worthiness of genuine affection. He acknowledged that their marriage had begun as a business transaction, but argued that the love that had grown between them was separate from and more valuable than the financial arrangements that had brought them together. Emma's response was a mixture of relief and continued anguish as she finally voiced her deepest fears. that she was a gold digger who had manipulated Alexander's kindness, that her love for him was compromised by gratitude and financial dependence, and that she could never be certain whether her feelings were authentic or influenced by the security he provided. Alexander addressed each of Emma's concerns directly, pointing out that her behavior throughout their marriage had consistently demonstrated that she valued him as a person rather than as a financial resource. Her discomfort with his wealth, her focus on her mother's welfare over personal luxury, and her plans to repay him proved that her motivations were honorable rather than mercenary. The conversation that followed was the most honest and vulnerable exchange either had ever experienced, as they worked through the complex emotions that had developed alongside their practical arrangement. Both acknowledged that their love was real but complicated, valuable but challenging, and worth fighting for despite its unconventional origins. Chapter 13. The Choice. Emma's decision about their future came not through dramatic gesture or sudden revelation, but through gradual acceptance that love could be both practical and profound, strategic and sincere. Over several weeks of careful conversation and honest self-examination, Emma began to understand that her motivations for marrying Alexander didn't negate the genuine affection that had grown between them. Alexander gave Emma the space and time she needed to work through her emotional conflicts without pressure or ultimatums. He continued to treat her with the same kindness and respect that had characterized their relationship from the beginning, demonstrating that his love was not conditional on her reciprocation but was offered freely regardless of her decision. The turning point came when Emma realized that her desire to repay Alexander and end their marriage early was motivated not by lack of love, but by her inability to accept that she deserved happiness and security. Her mother's recovery had been successful, but Emma had been so focused on that crisis that she hadn't allowed herself to imagine a future that included personal fulfillment and romantic love. Emma's conversation with her mother proved decisive when Emma Chen pointed out that every marriage involved practical considerations alongside emotional ones, and that Emma's honesty about her initial motivations actually made her love for Alexander more trustworthy rather than less. Linda observed that Alexander had chosen to love Emma, knowing exactly why she had married him, which proved that his feelings were based on who she was, rather than on illusions about her circumstances. The renewal of their vows took place in the same garden where they had first married, but this time the ceremony was attended by hearts as well as witnesses. Emma wore the same simple white dress, but her expression reflected choice rather than desperation, hope rather than resignation, and love that had been tested by honesty and proven genuine. Alexander's wedding gift to Emma was not jewelry or luxury, but payment for the law school tuition she had sacrificed to care for her mother. Emma's gift to Alexander was the decision to build their future together, not because she needed his financial security, but because she wanted to share her life with the man who had shown her that love could be both practical and profound. Their second wedding was the beginning of a marriage that would be based on mutual choice rather than mutual necessity, though both had learned that the strongest foundations often include both elements working together in harmony. Thank you for joining us for this emotional journey about love, sacrifice, and the courage to choose happiness even when circumstances are complicated. Emma and Alexander's story reminds us that the most meaningful relationships often begin in unexpected ways, and that true love can grow from practical foundations when nurtured by honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. This story shows us that people make difficult choices for love, and that understanding and forgiveness can transform even the most challenging beginnings into something beautiful and lasting. We'd love to hear from our global audience. Please let us know in the comments where you're listening from as we share these stories about the complexities of love, family, and the choices we make when everything important is at stake.